Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to take a whole load of information and really boil it down, find those moments that make you go, aha.
That's the goal, making complex stuff clear.
Exactly. So last time we got into that really fascinating topic of moral sense theory. You know, how those Scottish Enlightenment thinkers believe we have this sort of built-in compass for right and wrong.
Right, and how that wasn't just philosophy floating in the clouds, but it actually, laid some serious groundwork for the American founding. It shaped how they thought about people and laws.
It really did. But talking about that moral compass, it naturally brings up an even bigger, maybe more fundamental question.
Which is?
Well, okay, if we have this moral sense, how do we actually know anything for sure? How do you know it's true? I mean, morally, yeah, but also politically, even physically. Is the chair I'm sitting on really here?
Yes. The deep dive into epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and what's truly fascinating and maybe a little unsettling is how tied up this question is with everything else, especially liberty. Well, think about it. If you start to seriously doubt your ability to perceive reality, to know what's real versus what's just, I don't know, an opinion or a dream, then everything else starts to wobble.
Like a Jenga tower.
Kind of, yeah. The possibility of having a stable society where people can govern themselves, it really hangs on whether we believe we can access some kind of shared truth. If we can't, the whole project starts to unravel.
Okay, let's definitely unpack this because it sounds philosophical, but the implications are huge, right? So our mission today is to trace this path. We're going from this really radical, almost paralyzing doubt.
The kind that makes you question everything.
All the way to this idea called common sense realism. And we'll see how these abstract arguments about knowledge weren't just abstract. They directly shaped the principles of a nation.
You'll see how a philosopher's attempt to find absolute certainty, thinking about evil demons and dreams, ironically led others down a path of deep skepticism.
And how, strangely enough, the simple act of trusting your own eyes, believing the world you see is real, became sort of a philosophical backbone for self-governance.
Exactly. We're connecting the dots from Descartes' study to the Declaration of Independence, in a way.
Get ready for some surprises, then. You'll see how our most basic assumptions about knowing things you probably don't even think about, actually underpin huge systems like law and government. Understanding this isn't just academic, it's key to understanding the debates happening right now. Right, so let's jump back in time. We're talking 17th, 18th centuries. It was a wild time intellectually. Science was booming, overturning old ideas about the cosmos.
Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, changing everything.
Yeah, but it wasn't just science. Philosophy, religion, all the old certainties were being questioned, challenged. It was like a philosophical earthquake. People felt they had to rebuild knowledge right from the foundation.
Absolutely. And right in the middle of all this shaking was René Descartes, French philosopher, mathematician, scientist, a real heavyweight, often called the father of modern philosophy.
Why modern philosophy? What did he do that was so different?
Well, Descartes lived when old authorities, the church, ancient philosophers like Aristotle were losing their grip. He wanted something absolutely solid to build knowledge on, something nobody could doubt no matter how skeptical they were.
So what was his rock-solid foundation?
His famous line, cogito, ergo sum.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. He reasoned like this. Okay, imagine an evil demon is tricking me about everything. Maybe I'm dreaming this whole reality. But even if I'm being deceived, even if I'm doubting, I must exist to be deceived or to do the doubting. The act of thinking proves the thinker exists.
That's pretty clever. It's hard to argue with that. If you're thinking you must exist.
Right. He thought he'd found his Archimedean point, that one undeniable truth.
Okay, so I exist is certain, but what about everything else? That revolutionary starting point, focusing on the individual thinking mind, didn't it kind of lead to a problem?
Oh, absolutely. That's the paradox. In finding certainty about the self, Descartes inadvertently cast deep doubt on everything outside the self.
So the chair I'm sitting on, the sounds I hear, you sitting there, all that becomes questionable.
Precisely. This is the core of Cartesian doubt. If your own internal consciousness, your thoughts, are the only thing you can be absolutely sure of, how do you reliably know anything about the external world?
How did he explore that doubt?
He used these thought experiments, like the dream argument. You have dreams that felt totally real, right? So how do you know for sure you're not dreaming right now?
Oh, yeah, that's unsettling.
Or the evil demon argument. What if there's some powerful, malicious being whose whole goal is to fool you, making you see a blue sky when it's really green, making you think 2 + 2 = 4 when it really equals 5?
Okay, that's nightmare fuel. But the point is, if your senses could be fooled so completely, then how can you ever trust them? How do you bridge the gap between your internal world of thoughts and an external objective reality that everyone else shares? You get trapped in what philosophers call solipsism, the idea that only your own mind is sure to exist. The world becomes this shaky inference, not something you just experience. You're kind of alone in your own head, trying to guess what's outside.
Exactly. It's a profound challenge.
And then, just when you think things can't get more doubtful, along comes David Hume, Scottish philosopher. He picks up where Descartes left off and basically cranks the skepticism dial way up.
Oh, Hume is something else. He took that doubt and applied it ruthlessly, not just to the external world, but to the very way we think we understand things we take for granted.
Like what? What did Hume attack?
Well, a huge one was causality, cause and effect.
He doubted cause and effect. How does anything work if you doubt that?
His argument is really clever and, frankly, kind of devastating. He said, look, when you see one billiard ball hit another and the second ball moves, what do you actually observe?
Well, I see the first ball move, hit the second one, and then the second one moves.
Right. You see one event constantly followed by another, a constant conjunction, he called it. But Hume asked, do you ever actually see the necessary connection, the force, the power, the thing that makes the second ball have to move?
No, I guess I don't see the force itself. I just see the sequence.
Exactly. Hume argued, we infer causality based on past experience, based on habit or custom. We see it happen over and over, so we expect it to happen next time. But we don't have rational proof or direct observation of the necessary link itself.
So, when a doctor gives me medicine and I feel better, Hume would say I can't know the medicine caused it. I just assume it did because it happened before.
That's the unsettling implication. It's an expectation, a very strong one, based on repeated observation, but not, according to Hume, a logically certain knowledge of the underlying causal power. This shakes the foundations of science, which relies on identifying causal laws.
It's like saying the sun rose yesterday and the day before and for ages. But that doesn't logically prove it must rise tomorrow. We just really, really expect it to.
Precisely. It's a profound challenge to our sense of a predictable, rational universe.
Wow. Okay, what else did Hume target?
The self, your own identity.
He doubted I exist. I thought Descartes settled that.
Not quite like Descartes. Hume wasn't denying thought happens, but he questioned whether there's a single, unified, enduring self having those thoughts. He said, try to look inside yourself, introspect. What do you find?
Thoughts, feelings, memories, sensations.
Right. A constant stream, a flow of different perceptions. But Hume asked, do you ever perceive a continuous, unchanging I that underlies all those perceptions, or are you just experiencing the perceptions themselves?
I guess I experience the stream. It feels like me experiencing it, but
Yeah,
I don't perceive some separate me thing.
Hume's conclusion was radical. We are nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions, succeeding each other with incredible rapidity. There's no permanent, unified self or soul holding it all together.
It's a bundle of sensations. That's deeply weird. What does that mean for, like, personal identity? Am I the same person I was yesterday if I'm just a different bundle of thoughts today?
Exactly the problem. It challenges continuity, memory, moral responsibility. If there's no enduring self, who is responsible for past actions? What does you even mean over time? It makes concepts like free will and accountability very difficult to maintain.
Okay, my head is spinning a bit. External world doubtful, causality doubtful, even my own self doubtful. Did he leave anything standing? What about morality? We just talked about moral sense theory.
Well, Hume had something to say about that too, and it connects directly back. He argued that moral statements saying something is right or wrong aren't statements of objective fact about the world.
So murder is wrong isn't objectively true.
According to Hume, no. Not in the same way that the sky is blue might be considered an empirical fact, leaving aside the evil demon for a moment. When you say murder is wrong, Hume argued you're primarily expressing a feeling, a sentiment of disapproval. You're reacting emotionally based on your human nature. perhaps sympathy or revulsion.
It's just an emotional outcry, not a statement about reality.
It's an expression of your sentiment, your feeling about the act. It's rooted in human psychology, maybe shared human psychology, but it's not describing an objective moral property out there in the world independent of human feelings.
The implications of that are massive, aren't they? If murder is wrong, is just how I feel, how can we have universal laws? How can we condemn atrocities if it's just, different feelings?
Precisely. It undermines the idea of objective good and evil. Morality becomes relative to human sentiment, potentially varying between people or cultures. How do you build a system of justice or universal rights on that basis? It becomes incredibly difficult.
So if we follow this path, Descartes starts with doubt, Hume ramps it up.
Yeah.
Where does it ultimately lead?
If you follow that skeptical road all the way, you end up in radical skepticism, the view that we can't really know much of anything for certain. And from there, it's a very short step to relativism.
Relativism meaning truth itself is just relative.
Yeah. If we can't be sure about the external world, cause and effect, a stable self, or objective morality, then what's left? Maybe truth is just relative to the individual perceiver. My truth is what I feel or sense. Your truth is what you feel or sense. Or maybe it's relative to our culture, our language, our time period. There's no universal objective standard to appeal to.
And if that's true, wow, how do you build anything? How do you have laws or rights or even agree on basic facts if everyone's truth is just their own feeling or perspective?
That's the critical question, isn't it? It poses a profound challenge to the very possibility of a shared society built on reason and justice. If everything is relative, how do you have a meaningful debate? How do you achieve justice? How do you even teach kids anything as definitively true? It can lead to intellectual paralysis, but also real societal fragmentation. If we can't agree on reality, what's left but power struggles?
Okay, that's a pretty bleak picture. It feels like philosophy is leading us into a dead end.
It certainly felt that way to some people at the time. The skepticism was powerful.
So into this whole swirling vortex of doubt, this intellectual crisis, someone must have pushed back, right? Someone must have said, wait a second, this can't be right.
Absolutely. And a key figure who did just that was Thomas Reid, another brilliant mind from the Scottish Enlightenment, actually a contemporary of Hume. He saw where Hume's skepticism was leading and felt compelled to offer a robust response.
Okay, Thomas Reid, what was his big move? How did he counter someone as sharp as Hume?
Reid published a really important book in 1764 called An Inquiry into the Human Mind on the Principles of Common Sense. And his core argument was, in a way, startlingly simple and practical.
Simple? How so?
He essentially said, look, forget the elaborate philosophical arguments for a moment. Just think about living. If you actually tried to live according to radical skepticism, if you genuinely doubted your senses, your memory, the existence of the world, you literally couldn't function.
Couldn't get out of bed.
That's the famous takeaway. How would you know the floor exists to put your feet on? How could you trust your memory of where you left your shoes? How could you even eat breakfast, trusting that the food is real and nourishing? Reid brought the abstract philosophical debate crashing down to everyday reality.
So he's saying the very fact that we do function, that we navigate the world successfully every single day, proves that radical skepticism must be wrong somehow.
That's a big part of it. He argued that the consistent, practical failure of skepticism in real life shows it's an untenable position. It's an intellectual game, perhaps, but not a viable way to exist. It exposed the absurdity of doubting the very tools we use to live.
Okay, so it's impractical. But what was his positive argument? If we're not just inferring the world from sense data like Descartes suggested, or trapped in Hume's bundle of sensations, what are we doing?
Reid's really crucial insight was this. We don't infer the external world or causality or other minds. We experience them directly. It's an immediate apprehension.
Can you unpack that? Direct apprehension.
Yeah. Think about seeing a tree. Reid argued you don't first have a perception of greenness, roughness, tallness in your mind, and then logically deduce, those sensations must be caused by an external object called a tree.
Right, I see the tree.
Exactly. You perceive the tree itself directly as an object existing out there in the world. Your senses, according to Reid, aren't just giving you data about your own mind. They're giving you direct access to external reality. This is what he meant by common sense.
So common sense for Reid isn't just like popular opinion or what everyone happens to believe.
No, not at all. It's much deeper than that. For Reid, common sense refers to the fundamental, universal, unavoidable principles of belief and judgment that are part of our human constitution. They're the bedrock convictions shared by all sane people, essential for thinking and acting.
So we're kind of built this way. We're wired to trust our faculties and perceive reality directly, like an operating system.
That's a great analogy. Reid argued that we inherently trust our senses. Seeing, hearing, touching, our memory, our reason, and yes, even our moral intuition, not because we've proven they're reliable through some complicated argument, which Hume showed was likely impossible anyway.
Right, because any argument would have to rely on those very faculties.
Exactly, it becomes circular. Reid said we trust them because they are fundamental parts of how we are made. They are innate capacities. It's how we're designed, you might say, to connect with reality.
So it's a kind of foundational trust.
Yes, a trust in the basic tools we have for knowing. Think about it from your own experience. Do you constantly question if your eyes are deceiving you about the chair you're about to sit in? Or if your memory of eating breakfast is a total fabrication?
Well, no, not unless something really weird happens. I just trust them.
We rely on them constantly, instinctively. Reid saw these faculties as generally reliable guides, given to us, he believed, by a creator, to navigate the world effectively. To systematically deny them, as the skeptics did, wasn't profound insight. It was, in Reid's view, a kind of intellectual self-mutilation leading to absurdity and paralysis.
Okay, so Reid pushes back hard against skepticism, arguing for this inherent trust in our faculties and direct experience of reality. Let's nail down this positive view. What exactly is common sense realism?
Okay, boiling it down. Common sense realism is the philosophical position that certain fundamental truths are known immediately, intuitively, and universally by virtually all people. Reid called these fundamental truths first principles.
First principles, meaning they come first, like axioms in geometry.
Exactly like axioms. They aren't conclusions you reach through complicated reasoning or scientific experiment. They are the self-evident starting points for all reasoning and action. You can't prove them using something more basic because there isn't anything more basic.
They're just undeniably there.
Yes. They are the foundational beliefs necessary for thought and life itself. To try and doubt them consistently is, as Reid argued, practically impossible and leads to absurdity. They form the bedrock of shared human understanding.
Right. And these are the things that philosophers like Descartes and Hume, with their intense focus on logical proof and potential deception, have managed to make seem doubtful, even though we live by them every second.
Precisely. Reid sought to restore confidence in these fundamental, everyday truths that skepticism had tried to undermine.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Can you give us some examples of these first principles according to Reid?
Sure. Let's go through a few key ones he identified. First, and maybe most basic, the external world exists.
The chair is real. The tree is real.
Yes. We don't prove the table exists, we put our coffee cup on it. We interact with a world we perceive directly as being external to and independent of our own minds. Our senses give us immediate contact with this reality, trying to live as if it doesn't exist. Well, good luck.
Okay, that seems fundamental. What else?
Another crucial one. Other people have minds.
That others aren't just complex robots or figments of my imagination, but have thoughts, feelings, intentions like I do.
Exactly. We operate on this assumption constantly. It's the basis for all meaningful communication, empathy, social life, trust, cooperation, even understanding history or literature. When you talk to someone, you assume they understand they have inner states. You don't deduce it logically every time. You perceive their humanity directly, in a way.
Without that assumption, society collapses, doesn't it?
Completely. It's fundamental to being human in a community.
Yeah.
It directly counters that solipsistic trap.
Got it. External world, other minds. What's another?
How about this one? The future will resemble the past, at least in terms of the basic regularities of nature.
Ah, the causality thing again, but framed differently. Expecting gravity to keep working, the sun to rise.
Yes. It's the principle of the uniformity of nature, which underlies all inductive reasoning, all science, all planning. Hume argued we can't rationally prove this, it's just habit. Reid counters that while we can't prove it deductively, it's a necessary first principle for rational thought and action. We are constituted to expect these regularities.
We couldn't learn from experience or make any plans without assuming this basic consistency in how the world works.
Precisely. You couldn't build a bridge, plant seeds, or even decide to step outside without implicitly relying on this principle. It's essential for navigating time and making predictions.
Okay. And you mentioned moral intuition earlier. Is that a first principle too?
Yes, absolutely. Reid argued strongly that some actions are inherently morally right or wrong, and we have a faculty capable of discerning this.
So this directly challenges Hume's idea that morality is just emotion or sentiment.
Directly. Reid is saying our moral faculty perceives objective moral qualities, just like our eyes perceive colors. When we judge an act like deliberate cruelty to be wrong, we're not just expressing our distaste, we're recognizing an objective truth about the nature of that action.
A knowable, ethical reality.
Exactly. It connects right back to the moral sense theory we discussed.
Huh.
It provides a foundation for objective moral standards, for justice, for law, things that are very hard to ground if morality is purely subjective.
So summing up Reid's view on these principles, you don't need to build some elaborate philosophical proof for them from the ground up. They are the ground.
That's it, perfectly. They are the foundation you reason from. They're self-evident, immediate, and universally accepted in practice, even if philosophers try to doubt them in theory.
And Reid had that great line about doubting them.
Yeah, he essentially said, doubting these common sense principles doesn't make you profound or clever, it makes you useless. It cuts you off from the very tools you need to live and think.
It's a really provocative pushback against the perceived intellectual high ground of skepticism.
It really is, and he was very clear about what he thought philosophy should be doing.
What was his quote on that?
He said, I despise philosophy which leads to skepticism. Philosophy must be a map of human nature drawn from observation of the plainest truths.
A map of human nature based on the obvious stuff.
Yeah. For Reid, philosophy shouldn't be about creating complex, abstract systems that end up alienating us from our own experience and paralyzing us with doubt. It should be about understanding ourselves and the world as we actually encounter them, grounded in those undeniable common sense realities. It should illuminate how we know, how we act, how we live, based on observing how humans actually function. Philosophy is a practical guide, not an engine of confusion.
Okay, this is fascinating on a philosophical level, but now let's build that bridge. Because this whole debate about skepticism versus common sense realism wasn't just happening in isolation. It had huge implications for politics, didn't it? Especially for what we call classic American liberalism.
Huge, absolutely enormous. This is where the abstract philosophical ideas really hit the ground and shape history. The American founders, the key figures thinking about liberty, rights, and government in the late 18th century, were deeply, profoundly influenced by this Scottish common sense tradition.
So they weren't buying the radical skepticism of Hume.
No, quite the opposite. They overwhelmingly rejected that kind of skepticism and relativism. They fundamentally believed that crucial truths about morality, about human nature, about natural rights, even about political justice, were objectively real.
Not just opinions, not just feelings, but real.
Real. And crucially, knowable. They believed human beings, using their God-given reason and common sense faculties, could actually discover and understand these truths. This is a world away from the idea that truth is just a subjective feeling or a cultural construct.
So they believed in a reality we could tap into.
Yes, a moral and political reality that exists independently of our whims or desires, and that we have the capacity to grasp. This conviction was absolutely foundational for them.
And we see this in their writings, like James Wilson, who you mentioned, was a really key figure signer of the Declaration, Constitution, Supreme Court Justice.
Wilson is a perfect example. He was steeped in Reid's philosophy. Listen to this powerful quote from him. The moral precepts of the law of nature are of universal obligation. They are engraved by the finger of God on the heart of man.
Wow. Engraved by the finger of God on the heart of man. That sounds a lot like Reid's innate faculties and first principles.
It absolutely echoes it. Wilson is stating, unequivocally, that moral reality isn't something humans invent or construct through language or power struggles. It's given. It's part of the fabric of reality, originating, for him and many founders, from a divine source, but accessible through our natural human faculties, engraved on our hearts, knowable through reason and moral sense.
It's objective, it's universal, and it's accessible to us.
Yes, that's the core belief. Reality, especially moral reality, is not just a projection of our minds, it's something we discover.
And this leads directly to the possibility of self-government, doesn't it? If these truths are real and knowable.
That's the crucial leap. Because if these moral truths and natural rights are objective and accessible to human reason, if they are self-evident, as the Declaration puts it, then you have a solid, shared, universal foundation upon which to build a just political order.
A common ground.
A common ground based on knowable reality, not just shifting opinions. Self-governance becomes possible because citizens can appeal to these shared, understandable principles. They have a standard to judge laws and government actions against.
So government isn't just based on who has the most power or what the majority happens to want at any given moment.
No. Ideally, its legitimacy comes from its alignment with these deeper, knowable truths about justice, rights, and human nature. Without that belief in a shared, knowable reality, what basis do you have for claiming universal rights? What standard exists for justice beyond mere power or preference? The founders believed that because we can know the right way to live together, we can govern ourselves accordingly. It connects philosophy directly to the practical task of creating a republic.
Right, so this belief in knowable objective truth wasn't just background noise for the founders. You're saying it's actually baked into the key documents and the structure of the American system itself.
It really is. It's like the philosophical DNA running through it. Let's look at some examples. Start with the Declaration of Independence.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Exactly. That phrase self-evident is practically buzzing with Reidian common sense philosophy. What does self-evident mean? It means a truth that doesn't need external proof. Its truth is immediately grasped by reason and common sense once you understand it.
Like Reid's first principles, obvious once you see them.
Precisely. Things like all men are created equal, possessing unalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These aren't presented as hypotheses to be tested or opinions to be debated. They're asserted as foundational, objective truths, knowable through our innate faculties. They just are, and form the basis for the argument that follows.
Okay, that's clear in the Declaration. What about the Constitution? How does common sense realism show up there?
The Constitution, in its very structure, presupposes a stable human nature.
Meaning people are basically people with predictable tendencies.
Yes. It assumes humans have a capacity for reason and virtue, but are also prone to ambition, self-interest, and factions. The whole system of checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, it's all designed to work with that stable human nature.
To channel the good stuff and control the bad stuff.
Exactly. It aims to prevent any one person or group from getting too much power, acknowledging the potential for abuse. If human nature was seen as totally malleable or constantly changing, a fixed constitution designed to last for generations wouldn't make much sense. You'd need a system that constantly adapts to whatever humans are becoming. But the Constitution assumes a certain consistency, allowing for enduring principles and predictable governance.
That makes sense. And the Bill of Rights. You mentioned rights earlier.
The Bill of Rights is a powerful statement about objective rights, not just subjective preferences or government grants.
What's the key difference there? Objective rights versus preferences.
It's huge. A preference is something you want. An objective right is something you are inherently entitled to simply by virtue of being a human being, a rational and moral agent. Rights like freedom of speech, religion, due process, the Bill of Rights, treats these as pre-existing realities that government must respect and protect, not gifts it bestows or takes away.
So the rights exist first, government comes second.
That's the idea. They are grounded in that knowable moral reality, in the inherent dignity and nature of the human person, independent of government decree. They aren't just things we collectively decide we like today. They reflect fundamental truths about what is required for human flourishing and self-governance.
Okay, so that's the classic American vision, deeply rooted in this common sense realism. Now, let's contrast that sharply with some more modern ways of thinking. How does this older view stack up against, say, postmodernism?
Well, it's almost a direct clash. Postmodernism, in many of its forms, fundamentally challenges the idea of objective truth. It often argues that truth isn't discovered, but constructed by language, by culture, by power structures. There isn't one grand narrative or universal reality, just lots of competing perspectives or narratives, none inherently more true than another.
So your truth, my truth, but know the truth.
That's often the takeaway. If you follow that line of thought, concepts like universal human rights, objective morality, or even scientific objectivity become problematic. They might be seen merely as dominant narratives imposed by certain groups. This directly contradicts the common sense realist view of a shared, knowable reality.
Okay, what about progressivism, especially some modern strands?
A key contrast there often lies in the view of human nature. While the founders saw human nature as relatively stable, needing checks and balances, some strands of progressivism tend to view human nature as much more malleable.
Changeable. Perfectible, even.
Potentially, yes. There can be an underlying belief that social structures, education, or government action can fundamentally reshape human beings, overcome inherent limitations, and engineer a better society by changing people themselves. This contrasts with the older view of designing systems to work with human nature as it is, acknowledging both its capacities and its flaws.
So less focus on checks and balances, maybe more on social engineering.
In some interpretations, yes. The emphasis might shift from accommodating a fixed nature to actively transforming it towards a perceived ideal.
And finally, what about libertarianism? How does it fit or contrast?
Libertarianism strongly emphasizes individual rights and liberty, which resonates with the founding. However, some forms of libertarianism, particularly those focused almost exclusively on the non-aggression principle and individual autonomy, can sometimes seem to ignore or downplay the importance of an objective moral reality beyond consent and property rights.
Focusing just on freedom from interference, maybe less on a shared moral good.
Potentially. The risk is reducing all interactions to contracts or voluntary exchange, possibly neglecting the thicker, shared moral framework, the duties, virtues, and common good that the founders, drawing on common sense realism and moral sense theory, believed underpinned true liberty. For them, liberty wasn't just being left alone, it was the freedom to pursue virtue and flourishing within a knowable moral order.
So if we boil down that original classic American liberal vision, grounded in common sense realism, what's the core assertion?
The core assertion is something like this. You, the individual human being, are fundamentally a rational and moral creature. You are made with the capacity to know reality, the physical world, other minds, cause and effect, and objective moral truths. And because of this, you are made to pursue the good. Therefore, the purpose of a law, the justification for liberty, and the structure of government must align with and respect that fundamental reality of human nature and the discernible moral order.
It's a vision of an ordered liberty grounded in a knowable reality.
Exactly. Not liberty as chaos or pure subjective choice, but liberty within a framework of truth and goodness that we can actually understand through our common sense.
Listening to that contrast between the founders' reliance on common sense realism and some of these more modern trends, it really does feel like today we're drifting away from that foundation.
I think drifting is a good word, maybe even eroding. We see the consequences playing out all around us, don't we? When you abandon that foundation of common sense realism, what happens?
Well, you mentioned postmodernism, treating truth as subjective.
Right. And we see it in how we often treat morality like mere opinion. It's just your personal feeling, my personal feeling. There's reluctance to make strong, universal moral claims.
And identity.
Identity often gets treated like a pure construction, something entirely fluid, self-chosen, potentially disconnected from any underlying biological reality or shared human nature. The idea of a stable human nature itself is often challenged.
And truth itself.
And truth itself can become weaponized or seen as offensive. Instead of a common goal we strive for together through reason and evidence, it becomes something asserted based on power or dismissed if it makes us uncomfortable or challenges our preferred narrative.
Yes. Yeah, that's not just a shift in cultural mood, is it? You called it a philosophical collapse earlier.
I think it is, because it's undermining the very tools we need to think clearly and live together. When the foundations of how we know what's real and what's right start to crumble, the whole structure built on top becomes unstable.
How did that instability show up?
Think about public discourse. If there are no objective truths or shared facts to appeal to, how can you have a rational debate? It just descends into shouting matches, appeals to emotion, or battles of competing narratives where power, not reason, determines the outcome.
Dialogue breaks down.
Dialogue breaks down. Trust in institutions, media, science, government erodes because the very idea of objective reporting or impartial judgment is questioned. Political polarization deepens because there's no common ground, no shared reality to even begin a discussion from.
Okay, so let's bring this home for everyone listening. What are the real stakes here?
Yeah.
Why does this philosophical drift matter to us in our everyday lives, in our communities?
The stakes are incredibly high because if we genuinely lose our grip on the idea that we can know what's real, if our senses, our reason, our moral compass are dismissed as fundamentally unreliable or merely subjective constructs, then what happens?
We can't defend liberty.
How could you? On what basis? If there's no objective truth about human rights or justice, then liberty becomes just another preference, easily overridden by power or popular opinion. It loses its firm grounding. We can't make laws that are truly just because justice itself becomes relative, a matter of who has the power to define it at any given moment. There's no external standard to measure against.
And self-government.
Yeah.
The whole American experiment.
It becomes profoundly threatened because self-government depends on citizens being able to reason together, make judgments based on shared principles, and hold power accountable to knowable standards. If we lose the grounds of judgment, if we can't agree on basic facts or fundamental moral truths, then how can we possibly govern ourselves collectively?
We lose the common ground needed for deliberation, for compromise, for consensus.
Exactly. Society risks fracturing into conflicting tribes, unable to resolve disputes peacefully or pursue common goals, because the shared understanding of reality itself has dissolved. The very possibility of a functioning republic built on the foundations the founders laid is put at risk when common sense realism is abandoned. Hashtag outro.
Wow, okay. This has really laid bare how much rests on those seemingly simple philosophical assumptions about whether we can know what's real. It wasn't just armchair speculation for the founders.
Not at all. It was the essential bedrock.
So we've looked at the moral sense as pillar 1, common sense realism, how we know reality as pillar 2 of classic American liberalism.
And that sets us up perfectly for our next deep dive. We'll take these 2 pillars and see how they support the third, the actual political philosophy of the American founding.
Right. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of how figures like James Wilson, James Madison, John Adams, and others translated this moral and epistemological vision, this belief in noble truth and morality, into the actual design of the Constitution and the American Republic.
How they built the machine of government based on these underlying principles about human nature and reality.
I'm looking forward to that. So as a final thought for everyone listening today, something to chew on.
Maybe consider this. How much of your everyday life just think about mundane things like obeying traffic laws, trusting the food you buy, or even having a conversation with a friend relies on an unspoken, almost automatic assumption of a shared, knowable reality? What actually happens, practically speaking, when that underlying trust starts to fray?
And maybe also think about your own moments of insight, those aha moments we aim for here. Do they usually feel like you've invented something totally new? Or more like you've suddenly seen or understood a truth that was already there, waiting to be recognized? Where else in your life might be? Looking for knowable truth? Rather than assuming everything is subjective, bring more clarity.
Good questions to ponder. It gets you thinking about how fundamental this stuff really is.
It certainly does. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.